Hey Noni, thank you for coming in. You're just so highly recommended. You have an outstanding career, a transformative story arc. You're considered one of the most amazing leaders in the world, and I'm really thankful for you coming in and sharing your marvelous insights with the audience.
Well, hi, Stephen. Thank you for inviting me to join in this wonderful program.
So Noni, I'm always curious when I meet, significant people like you, and you're making history, you're continuing to make contributions, and they're felt and they reverberate globally because of the outstanding nature of your work. I'm curious there must have been some inflection points in your life that made you who you are today. Could have been when you were very young, it could be from your family, maybe it was in school or maybe your first job. Can you name maybe two or three inflection points that, wow, that sort of transformed you along in your story arc?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about inflection points, I think there are several. There are too many inflection points in my life. I think I change a lot each time. But I would divide it into two. One inflection point that actually defined the value of life to me happened when I was in elementary school, actually, because at that time, Bluebird, the company that I had been working on, that my late grandmother founded, we just started. And as we all know, a new company always come with challenges, and we were pretty economically challenged at that time. And I had the privilege of getting into a very good school. And somehow in that school, there are a lot of the upper class children. So I remembered each time my friend had a birthday, I could only give a notebook, up to the point that at one time my gift, when my friend opened it, my gift was thrown away because he said, "Oh, this must be from Noni." But that moment really defined me. It really defined the meaning of respecting others. So that's one. And then the second one, of course, the big one was the first time I went to Newcastle University in Australia. It was the first time for me to be away from my family. And in Indonesia, I'm not sure if you're aware, but in Indonesia, we have the privilege of having helpers in the house, right? It doesn't matter whether you come from a middle class or upper class or any classes, you normally would have a maid at home. So when I was sent to Australia, I went to Newcastle, which is a very small city. So the city girl had to go to a town which was the base for mining, coal mining base, Newcastle. And it was basically a very slow town at that time. And I did not know anyone there. So I had to survive. And I think that was the biggest inflection point of my life. I learned to be independent. I learned to appreciate other culture, and I learned to just expand my network because when I was younger, I was, and well, I still am, I guess. I'm not, I'm very much, I would prefer to be alone kind of person, but Newcastle changed me. Um, so I learned to expand my network. I learned to learn different cultures. I learned to learn different experiences. So Newcastle, I would say, is the biggest inflection point of my life. And then, of course, when my late grandmother passed away, that was a pretty sad moment. This was the one that defined one of my values as well, because I was with her when she passed away. But before then, she kept telling me that you have to remember your responsibility is not just for yourself or your family members or your family shareholders, but my responsibility is for the whole Bluebird family. That means the whole employees, drivers, and their whole family. So I think it sort of like defined my value as well, that shaped me into doing whatever I'm doing after that, because everything have to have a purpose, and the purpose have to be bigger than what you see at this moment. So I guess those, and my last inflection point was when I took over from my father as the CEO of the company. It was pretty challenging because not only that it's a transformation from second generation to the third generation, and you know what they say about the third generation, right? so so it's not only that, but we were faced with a lot of challenges like digital disruptions and then pandemic.
Oh, that's an amazing story arc. You know, you talk about learning this idea of respecting others when you were very young. You talk about going to university and finding that you have to grow from learning from other cultures, and it's completely different, and you've got to expand your boundaries, and this idea that the responsibility that you carry is much broader than you were thinking. And then when you do the company and all the aspects that come with being the CEO of the company, I mean, it's just a remarkable series of lessons, really a series of inflection points that help shape who you are today. So can you talk about the Bluebird Group and where it sits in the country, and maybe some of that story about its founding and how it grew, and then how you manage this disruption, and then where you see into the future. But let's first of all, let's go into its roots, the founding of it and how that occurred, and then how it grew over the years.
Yeah. The company Bluebird was founded by my late grandmother. I mean, this was pretty unique by itself, right? In 1972. She was not a businesswoman, actually. She was a law lecturer. And my late grandfather was also a law professor. So we came from education backgrounds, and everyone was doing law somehow. My late grandfather passed away. He was a very dedicated lecturer. He was a founder of the University of Indonesia Social Sciences and Law Faculty. He was a founder of the Military Law Academy, several places. So he was awarded as an Indonesian hero in education. When he passed away, because they had been living based on very high integrity. So when he passed away, he basically gave back most of the things that he got during his life, except for one house that they live in. So my late grandmother was pretty much challenged because she had 3 children at that time. Although they're not that young, but they still need to continue with their educations. So it was an economic pressure that changed her from being an educator to a business person. So she started by selling batik, the fabrics, the Indonesian traditional fabric, in her neighborhood, because the house was located in a middle upper class neighborhood. So she went around, and then, but she realized that people don't buy batik every day. So she had to change to a business, she has to change to a different business. And then she started to sell eggs. So my father and my late uncle helped her with the business. And 1971, there was an opportunity because the Jakarta governor at that time had the idea of opening a formal taxi industry or taxi businesses, taxi licenses. When she first applied, she didn't get the license because she was considered as a non-business person. She didn't have any experience. The only thing that she had was a high spirit, a lot of energy, a lot of ambitions. And then she didn't give up. She kept asking and asking, because we started in 1965, before the taxi license was issued. We started with 2 cars that we were given by the government. And she started introducing this 24 hours limousine service. Although it was only 2 cars, and the drivers were my father and my late uncle. And the 24 hours customer service were my mother and my late aunt as well. So, it's really a family business that started in our garage. So when I was born, a few years before Bluebird was established, that would give the hint, because Bluebird was established in 1972. So I grew up basically at the office, because our home was our office. So I learned a lot from my late grandmother about what inspired her to grow this company. So she taught me, or she shared with me about the name Bluebird itself. She kept telling me about this story, a fairy tale about this little girl who was very poor, and she was looking for happiness. And in the story, it said that she had to go a long way to find Bluebird, the bird of happiness. There were several things that were challenged at that time. First one, she found a huge treasure box. And then she was a teenager, very poor. And of course, there were thoughts that, maybe I should just take those treasure. Then I would be happy. But then she didn't. She continued on. The reason why she didn't is because that was not a kind of happiness that she was looking for. And along the way, there were several other teenagers, and they were asking her to go out and have parties with them, because they said, oh, you're looking for happiness, just come with me, with us, and have parties, you would be happy. And she moved on, because that was not the kind of happiness that she was looking for. And then she moved on and on and on, until she got really tired. And when she was just about to eat the only piece of sandwich she had, there was a very old person passing, and he looked really tired and really hungry. So she gave her only sandwich to that person. That's when she found Bluebird, the bird of happiness. So my late grandmother taught me that the real happiness is the happiness of giving. So that formed my values also in life. And that's what drive me every day. The main reason why we have to do what we have to do, and the main reason why we have to grow the company, is based on this, because the more we have, the more we can give. So Bluebird started as a transportation or taxi company formally in 1972, and it had grown its businesses into several industries. So on top of taxi service, we also have limousine services, buses, we have logistics service, we have property business, and IT services and trading services. So at this moment, we have about 50,000 people working under our group. So, but, I think the business itself is just the mean. The purpose is bigger. As my late grandmother told me, that the more you have, the more you can give. So that's basically the business. And of course, if you mentioned about challenges, right? In transportation, as we all know, we've been challenged a lot. But the company, because we've been around, this year will be 50 years old by 1st of May. So it's quite old for a company, right? Especially for a family-based company. So we have faced different challenges in our business life. The last few ones were in 2016, when we were challenged by the digital disruptions, what everyone called the online transportation, like Uber and so forth. So we had to go through that. We have to change and transform the way we do business. That is, if you want me to elaborate later, then I can do that. And then the latest one, our company, our business were challenged by the pandemic. It was the worst time in our history, because by 2020, April 2020, our revenue was down by 70%. So that's one of the biggest challenges that we had to face.
Wow, I mean, that's an incredible, again, story about how it's founded and this idea of giving. And as you've grown, it gives you more of this ability to give. And it's about having purpose. We call that purposeful leadership. So definitely sort of this generational purposeful leadership. And then you talked about earlier this sense of responsibility you have beyond your family, but to the greater community, the people that you work with and collaborate with as well, and really are partners in your business. The drivers are really partners in your business. And well, you have many businesses, and everybody is a community, they're stakeholders. And I guess that speaks to return on value rather than return on investment, right? Which is this multi-stakeholder idea. I just such a wonderful story. You know, you talk about this digital disruption. So how did you become aware that this was happening? Was it organically, or did you have some indication even ahead of time that was it a surprise, in other words, or were you prepared as that change was occurring?
Well, yes and no. It's pretty much gray. Because okay, I would say that this is a lesson learned for us, right? Because we have been the most innovative company in Indonesia when it comes to transportation, and that somehow has put us in the being a pioneer dilemma, if I may say so. Since the very beginning, I mentioned that we have been really innovative in things. For example, we were the first one in Indonesia that installed the meter, to be used for taxi. We're the first one that used air conditioning. We're the first one that used integrated computerized system in early 80s in Indonesia for our transportation services. And even up to the point that I think it was 2011 or 2012, that we got awarded by BlackBerry. At that time, BlackBerry was the one, right? Especially in Indonesia, we got awarded for being the first taxi company in the world that launched taxi mobile application. So it was way before, right? So we thought that, okay, we're the pioneer. We have launched this taxi mobile application, but the customer didn't pick it up as much as we thought they would be. And then we made a conclusion based on our own assumptions that our customer just simply do not like booking a taxi through an app, forgetting that, or not really forgetting, but maybe we didn't really pay much attention that in order for a new technology to be successful, there are other factors that needs to be mature as well or be ready, like infrastructure, the network itself. We ran the taxi mobile application on a very old network technology, which is the RGS or something like that. So, so it's hard, it's very difficult for you to get a consistent signal or network at that time. So of course, customers didn't like it. So then we didn't develop it further. We kept it as is. And came 2016. So we heard about Uber already from 2013, I think 2014. That's when Uber started to pick up in the US. We heard about it because we used to visit, and we still does visit the US quite a lot, and we do a lot of benchmarking with other taxi companies around the world. So we learn about these things. But then we thought, we have our taxi mobile application. It doesn't work in Indonesia. That's the way we thought. So this is the lesson learned. Come 2016, then the technology was ready, and Indonesia, the people are ready. We had Uber, we had Grab, we had an Indonesian online taxi service, Gojek. So all came at one time. And at that time, there was no regulation yet for the online taxi business, right? So of course, there are a lot of confusion and things. So the biggest event was that there was a huge demonstration by the public transportation drivers. So I personally was surprised that some of our drivers joined that demonstrations.
Mm.
It was, I think, more than 2,000 people on the street, but we found out that about less than 200 of our drivers joined. But then it was very chaotic and stuff. So it was like a wake-up call for us. Then what did we do? We couldn't, I think this is one thing that I learned from my own accident when I was trying to learn to do buddy boarding. So I was rolled in a wave, right? So the lesson learned from that is when you're in crisis, you cannot panic. But at the same time, you cannot be in denial because both would be deadly. So, we started to learn about, okay, what's really going on, what changes out there, macro-wise, the changes of the customer's behavior. But what's most important also, we need to understand our own strengths and weaknesses. Only then we can do the right transformation without losing our own soul per se, or our own value or our own main services. So that's what we did. So the demonstration happened in March 2016. By August 2016, we launched a collaboration with the online taxi company. The main reason for that is we see our strength. Bluebird has been known as a transportation company that is the most reliable. We returned 77% of the left belongings in our taxis, and that is remarkable. It's really based on the honesty and integrity of our drivers. And so we're really well known for that. And we're also well known to give the standard, a very high standard of service. And we see that our weakness is in the channeling, how our customers can reach out to our services. So then we came out of the idea of multi-channel reservations. Since our IT was not as strong, or is still not, because we're not an IT company, as strong as the online, so-called online taxi, so we collaborate with them. So in August 2016, people can find our service in the Gojek platform, which is an online service transformation. So that's I think is the leapfrog per se, and also at the same time we're buying time to develop our own system. And then we're deciding what is our core. Our core is in the service itself. Our core is in the distribution of our assets, which is the vehicle itself. Our core is in the training of our drivers. So we keep that. Even when we're developing our technology, we keep the logistics or the distributions part of our fleets within our company, but we open our API to open for multi-channel platform. So it's like understanding our own strength and our own weaknesses, understanding our so-called competitors' strength and weaknesses, so we can open up ourselves and to cooperate together. So I think that's a huge change in the transportation industry mindset. So that's what happened then. But what keeps us together is actually our closeness with our drivers. We went through the economic and political crisis in 1998, for example, because of our closeness with our drivers. I forgot to mention to you that in 1999, right after the political and economical crisis, we launched Bluebird Peduli, Bluebird Cares, which focus on 4 pillars, but the biggest one is on education. So we have been giving scholarships to the children of our drivers since 1999. So every year we're giving to about 1,600, 1,700 students, children of our drivers and employees. And that created a bonding deeper than just a business relationship. And recently, a few years back, 5 years ago, we launched Kartini Bluebird, which is a women empowerment program catered for the wives of our drivers. So it is really a whole family program, and that is our real strength. Our bonding, our camaraderie, so when every time we have to face different challenges, we're facing it together, including the latest one, pandemic.
No, so that's interesting. So you see this market shift. In fact, ahead of time, you develop an app, and but the market isn't ready. The infrastructure isn't there to allow the realization of the app. So you're thinking there isn't a market, but really the technology and the infrastructure catches up, and as a result, you see this now becomes a competitor, and in essence, a threat to
Mhm.
your company. So you go through this process of saying, well, we're really strong in the logistics side. We've got this great network and a bonding, almost like a family relationship with our drivers. We're going to center on that. And we're going to leverage the online capability of one of these online companies, and we'll work in partnership. And this way, you're sort of utilizing, collaborating for the best of everyone. So you're transforming and you're doing collaboration in a really smart way. And then also on the impact side, you have these programs for women and also for the children of the drivers, so that you're having an impact relationship with your community, and you're driving both. In fact, you're leading in that area, and that leadership will continue because that comes from your soul. It comes from your family tradition. So it makes me laugh. I mean, like smile in a good way, like laugh in a good way, smile in a good way, because it's just such a wonderful, heartwarming story of how you're able to embrace change and embrace social impact and working with the community. And it just is such, it's so marvelous. Okay, so let's update this now. You know, it's 2022, and the pandemic was a major sort of challenge for you, and so how did you factor in the pandemic? How did you manage to, you know, recalibrate and do this digital reshaping during the pandemic? You know, what were the processes that you went through? And what are your feelings about continuing, because this pandemic looks like it's going to continue in some form for some time, right? So how are you going to manage that? And then we'll get into this article you written afterwards, but let's talk of the pandemic years and how you manage that.
Hmm. Yeah, I think for me personally, it was a real lesson learned that nothing is certain for sure.
Yeah.
And changes comes faster and bigger, in your life, and nobody will be exempted from that. I think that's the first thing. So when pandemic hit us, um, we are pretty much lucky in a way. Okay, let me try to go through my thought process here, because what happened in 2016 with the digital disruption, with the this new way of doing transportation, one of the things that we were criticized was because we are asset heavy. We own our fleets, we maintain our own fleets, and then we have a working relationship with the drivers. So we basically controlled all assets. We have our own depots, we have our own maintenance department, and things like that. So that was being criticized by a lot of investors at the time, because the assets are too heavy and things. This comes handy when it comes to pandemic, because basically we survive because of that in a way. In what way? During pandemic, of course, because 70% of our revenue was down within 1 month, so it's like plunged down. So we need to look at things from several point of view. How do we save the ship from sinking completely, while we have to build a new platform for the future, right? Because everything during the pandemic, after the pandemic, the customer behavior will change. The whole environment will change. The infrastructure will also change. The way we conduct interviews change completely, right? I mean, in the old days, we this is not a preferred way of doing interviews. We would rather do face to face, but now this gives us flexibility. So it's the same. Everything just changes. So what happened to us at that time is that, lucky for us, because we do have full control of our fleet and our drivers. So we manage, like when you're at war, you need to manage everyone to be together, to know where to go, and to save this whole ship together, kind of thing. What did I do? The first thing, is that, of course, we have to look at the company health financially. Luckily for us, we didn't have a lot of debt, but we still need to do financial restructuring, because what is important at that time is that we need to be able to survive. Because of our long-term relationship with our financial partners, because of the very good partnerships that we have developed, so we managed to be safe in that sense. And then we also need to realize that because a lot of the income from our drivers are based on commissions, even though they have their facilities and things, but a lot of their income based on commission. So we need to make sure that they still can live. It's enough for them to live. But the company didn't have enough money. So how do we do that? So we have to sort of like shrink at that time our operations, so that we can give minimum support to most of our drivers and employees at that time. So that's another cost management that we had to do. And of course, I had to go around. I had to make sure that the scholarship was still running. The company was at loss, so I couldn't get it from the company's fund. So I asked for an endowment fund from my parents. So, so we just do everything we could to survive at that time. But this is another thing that was different. We do have a midterm plan that part of our expansion is to do logistics, for example. Because of the pandemic, we did not have any passenger on the street. We didn't have enough revenue from the passenger at that time. So we need to accelerate our plan for our logistics services itself. So some of our budget, we are focusing more on the development of our IT capabilities. So I remember at that time, it was in April 2020, and I called up the whole IT department and I said, okay, we need to launch this logistics services in My Bluebird app. How long can you do it? Oh, and they said, oh, a year. No, I said, I cannot take a year. I give you 3 weeks. So of course, it is not perfect, right? The first time, but at least we're quick enough in doing that. So we change our focus, we change our priorities within our business, within the implementation of our strategies. Some of the projects that were meant to be 3 years later was taken earlier. Some of the projects that were meant to be done now or that time, like the expansion of our electric vehicles, that have to be postponed, unfortunately, because we need to balance this things out. But what is most important is to make sure that the mental health of our drivers and employees are in a good mental health situation. The energy have to be maintained. I think that's the main objective of a leader in crisis. Because if they give up, if they don't have hopes anymore, then the company will definitely collapse. So I think that's the balancing act. I think that's my biggest learning during the pandemic. So I feel that it is a privilege for me that I was given that kind of opportunity to learn it, hopefully once in a lifetime experience. Hopefully I don't have to go through it again. But the experience that I gained is so rich, because we have so limited resources, very limited budget, and we have to do two things. We have to save the company, the ship from sinking, and yet we have to make sure that the ship will go further. So yeah, it is a really great balancing act.
That's again such a transformative story. It's a personal story for you because you've learned so much through this process, and it just shows you how agile you are in your thinking, about compassionate as well, because you're thinking about the well-being of your community together with your company, the well-being of your company, and also you're streamlining operations, but in that you'll see efficiencies that maybe you wouldn't have seen before.
Yes.
And
yes. Everything happens for a good reason.
including your IT department. You could deliver in weeks what they would normally take in a year, let's say. I mean, so they did what I consider the near impossible, right? And people sometimes think things are impossible, but they're not. They just have to really be passionate and drive and work hard, and then all sorts of challenges can be met. So it's such an interesting, heartwarming, inspirational story as well. And it shows that you have this natural agility, a brilliance to manage this process, about brilliance with a heart. And so again, it speaks to the bluebird symbol, I think.
Yeah, the bird of happiness, the bird of happiness. Well, I hope so. Yeah, but it's been really, I'm being blessed, I think, being given such a strong foundation to begin with, that was developed by my late grandmother, by my father, and my whole family members who were part of the development of the company itself.
So you also are interviewed, or do you make contributions to publications in your region? Can you talk more about that? And then we'll get into some of the areas that you've been interviewed on or you've written on. And so let's explore that part, sort of the media, the publishing, the thought leadership, and so on. So can you sort of share some recent experiences on that end?
Yes, thank you. For Forbes Indonesia, that was I took part in writing an article about the future of Indonesia. And to me, I think what is important, a lot of times people, there are two schools of this advancement of technology. One school feels that advancement of technology is a real threat to human being, with the Terminator and so forth, and and one school thinks that the digital advancement or technology advancement is like godlike, that we all have to follow, we all have to embrace as much as we can, and things like that, which is true. We do have to embrace as much as we can, but for what purpose? I think that's what's important. So the sweet spot is for one to be able to find the intersection among this humanity factor, economic benefit, and the advancement of technology. Because everything that happens in our life, it should be catered, or the objective of it should be for the advancement of humanity. The advancement of technology would help us a lot, even for a transportation company like us, who was perceived as being a conventional industry. Because of the advancement of technology, we really got supported a lot. Now we can run the company much more efficiently compared to before. And we really needed the advancement of technology because we do have the assets. We do need to have the full control of where our vehicles are, at what time, and so on and so forth. So the advancement of technology had helped us, but it doesn't mean that the advancement of technology have to enslave us. So we need to make sure that we use the advancement of technology, or we embrace the advancement of technology in order to fit our own purpose. I was asked at one time, when do you think all of your fleet are going to be changed with the driverless vehicle? That is a very tricky question, because that would impact our drivers' well-being, right? So it comes back to my theory. It only works when it economically beneficial as well. The driverless car will work as the public transportation if the economic stages, the GDP of a country is already high enough. So we would have less people who wants to drive a taxi. Then it makes more sense. And on top of that, we need to wait for the infrastructure. So there's so many factors to it. Not just do we want to adopt it now or later. It's different too when we decide to launch our first electric taxi, the zero emission taxis. It is we're embracing the new technology because we wanted to contribute to zero emission. So, it's both are advancement of technology, but we look at it differently. So the time when we should adopt this advancement of technology has to be different for different kind of industries. That's what I'm trying to say. So again, that's the article in Forbes that I wrote. It's about we shall not forget that with this advancement of technology, why there are more and more children being depressed. So we need to address that too. So we need to be able not to choose A or B. We need to be able to look at the whole thing as a holistic point of view and use every resources we have. So basically that's the article in Forbes Indonesia. I had a privilege of being interviewed by Forbes Asia as well. That was in 2005 to discuss about our innovations in Bluebird, because as I mentioned earlier, that was before we got hit by so many different challenges again. Also, several interviews, because I'm a female leader in a male-dominated industry. I guess that aspects also is interesting for some people. How did we as female in the male-dominated industry manage or navigate through our career and our leadership styles? So there are several interviews by Bloomberg, by CNBC, to talk about that too.
There's so much to unpack here. I mean, like on the technology, and you did this with Forbes, there's this idea of the fourth industrial revolution, which came out in 2016 from the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, and that's sort of the confluence of the biological, digital, and physical, of which Uber and things like that, online applications should be part of that. Electric vehicles will be part of that. And then that was supplanted by Society 5.0, which came out of Japan. Some called Smart Humanity, which came out from the World Dutch IT Society. And that's about all of this change that's occurring, this transformation that's occurring across many, many different fronts, has an impact, and it's pervasive. It's going to affect culture and society and the individual in unprecedented ways. And the interesting thing is you're thinking about that, but you're thinking about timing as well, because what may be true for America, or may be true for China, or may be true for the Netherlands may not be true for Africa, or it may not be true for South America, or, timing differs depending on the conditions of that economy in that country. And so it's an interesting perspective that you have to consider, right? And displacement, which you talked about. I thought that was interesting that, a country has to be ready from a GDP standpoint so that drivers are not so much in demand in a sense, and then you can do more of this autonomous idea, coming into fore, or even with electric vehicles, you have to have infrastructure to support that. And so there's some really interesting thinking there. Where do you see this going then? Where do you see on this, the smart humanity side, this smart Society 5.0, where it's integrated into everything, into your economy, your cities, and so on? Where do you see that to be a sweet spot in your country? Do you think it's going to be 2030 or 2035 or 2025? Are you willing to go into that crystal ball or not?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball. And based on my experience, you can plan for everything and you think you know everything, but you don't. So because the changes come so fast, right? I think what is important is we always need to be aware of the trends. We always need to learn what would be the new technology and understand the real the ground. In Indonesia, there's this term that you have to stay close to the ground in order to understand what's really going on. Because only then, because as you mentioned earlier, there is no one size fits all, right? In order to adapt a new idea or new technology or whatever it is, you need to be able to understand the ground, our own value, our own strengths and weaknesses, as I mentioned earlier, in order to make it successful. We cannot just adopt and copy, because normally it is not sustainable. So I would think that Indonesia, given that we have so much resources, the human resources as one of it, because we are going to have a big productive population. If we focus on giving them a good education from now on. So there's always something that we need to do now in order to leverage our assets per se, right? Indonesia is blessed with abundance of natural resources. What we do with it for the future really have to start from now. I think Indonesian government already have a very good plan and in the mapping of it. I would say that different parts of Indonesia will grow at different time and adopt different kind of technology. So even within Indonesia, because it's so wide and so dynamic, we cannot really take one size that would fit all, or one project that would fit all. Even in our limited capacity as a transportation industry, even the way we implement our strategy is different in every cities in Indonesia. So I know this does not give you a real answer on things, but I guess, what we normally have, midterm planning in the old days is 5 years, right? And then long-term planning is about 10 to 15 years. Now, midterm planning is 1 year. So 1 year is midterm planning. 3
Right.
years is long-term planning. So as long as we can, as long as we make ourselves able to be agile, and we're always open, have a growth mindset, always learn, be alert, I think we would be able to make changes at the right time. Because that's our biggest learning during 2016. Because we were blinded by so many things, because we made the innovation a little bit too early and thought that it failed instead of keep adjusting it. So that part is very important, I think.
I mean, you bring up some really interesting ideas here, and a main idea here is that transformation is happening so much faster than before. It used to be that an arc of a transformation within an industry would be 10, 15, 20 years. Now it could be 1 year. It's like Apple in 1 year becoming a phone company. In fact, one of the largest phone companies, and they were a PC company at one point, right? And then they gone into music and entertainment, and like Apple TV Plus and so on. I mean, just everybody's a platform, and the fact that you don't know where the competition is going to come from, and it could be instant. So this idea that you need to monitor or do this short, medium term planning within a year, and then long term is 3 years, absolutely, right? Because so you don't get surprised. I just love your adaptability to the dynamic of where we live today. There's so many other areas that you touched on, though, and this idea too that you're a woman and you're a leader of an amazing company. It's a leader. It's known, especially in the YPO community, as a leading company, and that leadership represents a different kind of thinking from a male-dominated industry. So, what does that mean to you? And what are some of the challenges? And how does that difference manifest itself when you're in meetings and you're doing benchmarking against other companies around the world, or you're with other colleagues, but you're in the minority, let's say, and that minority could be on two fronts. It could be based on the part of the world you're from. It could be based on because you're a woman. It could be a number of factors that make you a minority. So, how do you manage that dynamic?
I'm blessed because my late grandmother was the one who taught me a lot about values, philosophies. My father supported me throughout my journey. Not only that I work in a male-dominated industry, I am a minority in my own family. In the third generation, there are 7 of us, only 2 females. I'm not even the oldest. So I'm very much blessed that the whole family are giving equal opportunities since we were young. But equal opportunities also comes with equal responsibilities. You know, a lot of times we forget that there's always two sides of the balancing scale, right? So I think that's how I was being brought up, with equal opportunity. So that's the one that I also want to share with other female members. That's what's important. And you have to fight for it. You have to fight. You cannot just ask for privileges without having to also give responsibility. So I think that's the main idea of it. Do I face challenges? Of course, everyone does, not just female, males also, right? But for me, my case, for example, when I was, even when I was studying in Newcastle, there were only 4 females in the whole faculty. So, but what I learned very quickly is marketing 101, product differentiation. So how do you bring yourself, you know, because you're given that privilege of being different. So it's a matter of how you present yourself to be different in a positive manner instead of being different in a negative manner. So I strongly believe that every human being has their feminine side and masculine side. And each of us have to decide when we should use our feminine side and when we should use our masculine side. So for me, being a female leader in a male dominating industry does not mean that I have to act like a male. It doesn't mean that I have to look like a male. Look at me, I have long hair. So I think women should come out as a woman, because what is needed is the diversity, is the different form of thinking. There is no point of being a female leader if we're trying to cover our own feminine side. You know, each of us have our own strengths and weaknesses, and we should see it as a person instead of female and males. That's what I'm trying to teach my 3 girls as well. So that's what I'm trying to do more, to give better opportunities for young girls. Because honestly, in many areas, that equal opportunities are not there. That's why when we launched Bluebird Peduli scholarships, we're encouraging more girls to go and take higher studies. Since 1999, when we launched it, we only had about less than 10% of girls receiving our scholarships. At this moment, we have about 50 to 55% girls receiving our scholarships from the 1,600. So it's a huge improvement. And also the main reason why we launched Kartini Bluebird, the Women Empowerment Program, was because we had been trying in our company to encourage more female to participate in our industry. But we also realized that it may not fit for everyone, and everyone should be given the options. So instead of just giving the opportunity to take part in the corporation, whether it's as a taxi drivers or as a manager or as the directors, you know, we also giving the opportunity for women to take part in the family economy through doing businesses from their home. So we're expanding this Women Empowerment Program, not just climbing the corporate ladder, but also giving opportunities, giving options for every female to contribute. Because I think every profession is really good as long as they do it in a very productive way and they do it with passion and purpose. So that's what I'm trying to advocate. I just give you a story. You know, when I just graduated from my engineering degree in University of Newcastle, I came back to working at Bluebird, right? I chose to work at the maintenance department because at that time we were installing a converter from gasoline to CNG. So I was really interested to learn. Of course, a lot of the mechanics, number one, they're much older than me. Number two, when they look at me, they were like, what is she doing in here? It's like, she's so young. What does she know? And was she here just because she's the daughter of the owner kind of thing? So, of course, I do have that. I had the look, even though they didn't attack me directly, but I had that look, the underestimating look. So what did I do? This is another thing that my parents taught me, my late grandmother taught me. If you want to be respected, you have to respect others first. When you enter a new working force, it doesn't matter who you are. You knew nothing. And the people there had a lot of experience, which I did not have. I may have the knowledge, but I did not have the experience. That's the first step. And so therefore, I asked a lot of questions. I learned from them. I genuinely wanted to learn more from them. So that created the bond, the mutual respect. I think that had helped me. Another challenge is the social pressure. A lot of times I said that as a female, we need to be brave. We need to be brave in breaking our own glass ceilings. Even, because if we don't do that to ourselves, who would? Because there's this social pressure surrounding us, right? I don't mean this in a negative way, but even my own mother was questioning my decision from time to time. It's like she made me feel guilty every time I go to work and not taking care of my young girls at home. So, but it is part of life. A lot of times we as human beings, not just as a female, we need to make decisions, the best possible outcomes out of the worst scenarios. Let me put it that way. So that's what helped me a lot going through this, a lot of learnings.
I'm just reflecting on everything you've said, that people are complex. And so they have this mix of female and male, but you don't hide what you're, whether you're male or female or some spectrum, right? You don't hide it. You wear it and it becomes a strength. If you're unique or different, that becomes a strength. Don't make it a weakness, make it a strength, right?
Yeah. But don't boast, right? I mean, you don't need to. I think it is very important for us to understand what can we contribute to whatever organization or society that we're in. I think that is what's important. It doesn't mean that I'm better than anyone else. No, but our strength will help the weakness of others, vice versa. Right. So we shall find, this is how I form my team, for example. We need to be able to find people with different strengths and weaknesses, because if everyone is the same, then there is no point of having a team.
Yeah, I mean, there's power and there's a lot of systemic and also an undercurrent of talent amplification if you have diversity in the team, right? And you really respect that diversity, just like you did when you started in the sort of like in the machine shop, in essence, right? and you're respecting the others who had more experience, even though you may have had more education, perhaps, but you want to respect their experience. I'm just doing a time check. We'd set aside an hour. Are you late for another meeting? And we'll just end with.
No, I'm okay.
Okay. And just to show the audience, this is unscripted, so I'm adjusting in real time. You say so many things, which just generates so many other questions. And I mean, I could go on for a day because you have so many different ideas, and they're wonderful ideas. You have wonderful stories and experiences. But we'll get to sort of the last part of this dialogue. You belong to YPO. Can you talk about YPO? Who is YPO? How did you get involved? And how do you see YPO as a woman being in this community?
Well, YPO is a huge part of my life. If you talk about inflection points, I learn a lot from being a YPO member. Of course, when I started, I think about 18 years ago, we didn't have that many female members. I'm sure there are several other countries that still have the same challenge. So at that time, my good friend Shinta, she was the one who invited me in. So then we encourage more female members to join with the same idea that the more diversity we have, the better the organization would be. Of course, we have to go through a lot of challenges, but I think YPO is one of an organization, a global organization that is really embracing diversity. And I learned what I meant by I learned a lot from YPO is not only I learned about the business side, because they have a lot of learning opportunities. I still join this Harvard Business School program every year. Unfortunately, I couldn't go this last 3 years, but I had been going for 7 years before then, every year, every January, being in Cole. So that is offered by YPO, for us as business people to be able to recharge ourselves. And that helped me a lot. Another program that I joined, which I think is very important to me, is the life program. How do you understand your life better? This is where I also learned about having a purpose in life. How do you make peace with yourself in order for you to advance? So I learned about, so not just business learnings, but also personal learnings and family learnings. YPO have a lot of family events, so that also helped me advancing or grow during my 18 years of time in YPO. And of course, I have sat in various positions in YPO. I'm the incoming chair for YPO Gold Indonesia also. So I've been in executive position on and off, Indonesia, regional, and I was part of an international task force as well.
So because I'm sort of external to YPO, I'll give my sort of view of YPO from an external standpoint. And this is all public information. So it's okay for me to talk about this because I know YPO is very private and very confidential in terms of by policy, by operation. So you don't find a lot of public sort of footprints about YPO because of this privacy by policy. So, but this is public. It's near 32,000 globally now, near 10 trillion annual revenue across 142 countries, over 450 chapters. You have networks, and networks are typically communities of, let's say, 1,000 CEOs of leaders who convene on different themes and so on. You have these things called forums, which are really private, intimate sort of sharing. And it's a support group because it's peer-to-peer, right? And so I would recommend the audience take a look to see you qualify. And then if you do, try to join this marvelous organization, because I've talked to and interviewed so many YPO members, and YPO is standing for the Young Presidents Organization. And it used to be that when you hit 50, you had to go to another organization, but you don't have to. You now can become something called YPO Gold. So you can stay within the YPO family. So, but I would say everyone, I mean, to the person, everyone just loves the organization and what they get from it, and especially the peer sharing. Yes. And the learnings that are made available. And
yes,
I know
it's very important. It is very important. I wouldn't survive the crises, including the last pandemic, if I did not get the support from my forum, from YPO, and beyond that. Because we have Forum Indonesia, and I also part of the Family Business Forum. So there's so much that you can gain from and contribute for being a YPO member. So I would very much recommend that.
Yeah, and in fact, I use an acronym to describe what you do by policy, and I call it PCART. And P is for privacy. You practice privacy, confidentiality, accountability. You respond very quickly. There's this kind of requirement that you respond within 24 hours within the organization. That cements trust, and there's just an immense amount of trust amongst this peer-to-peer organization. And it's like an extended family. That's the way I can best describe it, right? So, and you are so respected by your peers within this organization. In fact, that's how I came to interview you, is by recommendation,
I'm
saying
humbled, Barry.
saying that you're amazing, right? And you are. I mean, you've got so many great messages that you've been sharing during our time together. So I'm going to end with one final question, and you can reflect on this. What would you recommend to the audience? It could be 1 or 2 points. It could be as many as you wish that you want to share as a recommendation, or things or lessons that you think would be useful to my audience.
Well, I would echo to what you said. Try to check on YPO as an organization and see if you can qualify, because that would change. That changed my life. It helped me through any kinds of ups and downs. But you're right. I mean, the trusts that were built inside the organization is so tremendous. And because it's peer-to-peer, first of all, you feel that you're not alone in this world, because it can be lonely at the top. So that's very important. And I think I would also like to share what I learned from my late grandmother, from my parents, that whatever you do, it is very important that you need to have a purpose beyond the material things. And with that purpose, you need to put passion into it, because if you have a purpose without passion, you'll run out of energy. You feel that everything is an obligation. Although obligation is part of life, right? Especially coming from me, from a family, businesses. Obligation is part of life. Don't treat obligation as your enemy, per se. So put passion into it. And what is very important is we need to persevere, because life is not meant to be easy. And I learned from many people also, and throughout the organization, that the more you are challenged, the better of a person you would be, in a way, if you can find enlightenment out of every challenge that you're faced. I would like to close with one values that I learned from my late grandmother as well. She used to tell me that at the same time, you have to be able to look down and up. What does it mean? Because at this particular second, there is always people who are less fortunate than you are. No matter how miserable you feel at this moment, there will be people who are less fortunate than you are. But at the same time, you have to look up, because at the same moment, there are always people who are more successful than you. So you need to always strive to be better. So that's the main value that I live by every single day.
Those are wonderful lessons about growth. It's perpetual growth, but you do with passion and caring, right? And a good heart, and a love for the ecosystems and for humanity and so on, and to give. So thank you so much. I've learned so much from my short time here in this interview with you, this chat, and it was just wonderful. All the experiences you shared, all of the insights you shared, your family lessons as well, and your business lessons, and all of this forging that you've done ahead under different challenges, and how you've grown, and now you're sharing that journey, but also encouraging the audience to keep embracing the challenge, because that's life, right? And through that challenge, you grow and you learn. So thank you again. I'm grateful for you coming in and sharing so much with our audience.
Well, thank you so much. I have yet a lot to learn. Well, thank you for the opportunity, Stephen. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.